Give it a whirl, yeah. There's an interesting story about how sandboxes became a thing. This guy, Herman van Arnswald, wrote a letter to Friedrich Froebel, who's one of the founders of the kindergarten movement. And in the letter he wrote, and I'm going to try to do a voice for this, "Might not a plane of sand be made a useful and entertaining game?" Not bad. And this was amongst like an entire letter, which sounds crazy nowadays when you hear it, but it worked out. Sandboxes became like an educational foundation in kindergarten and became this like cultural phenomenon that we linked to childhood, which is such a cool thing that it happened in such a random way. My name's Stephen Harowitz. Outside of student affairs and improv, I started Creative Weekend, which is a 3.5-day retreat designed on creativity research. And that's kind of why I'm here to talk to you today and tell you a little bit about my philosophy and where Creative Weekend originated from. Isn't that pretty? What a pretty graphic. One of the beliefs that I carry is that we should treat this world a little bit more like our sandbox. That we should play and learn and expand our boundaries and stretch our creative muscles because it's important in our everyday life and not just our jobs. And that just like a sandbox, we should try and play nice and get along with each other. I mean, shoot. So all of this started when I got real mad, like really irrationally mad. People kept posting articles like 31 ways to be creative or 692 ways to have more insights, which you can't do, and that's insane. And what I realized in all of that is that nobody was being more creative. It was just social media fodder. And that really pissed me off. And people would come up, not to me, but in groups and say like, oh, I've always wanted to write a book, or I wish I could get back to painting. And I kind of want to just like shake them and be like, you can do that. You could do it right now. Why don't you go? And they never did. And it made me sad because there's so much that comes from that. If we could just take a second and put the things that we care about out in the world just because we care about them, and not because it does something for our job or our career, but because we want to. I kind of got to this place at one point where I needed to define creativity for myself because I kept talking about it and I never really defined it. And I have a very broad definition. I agree with Rolla May. Creativity is the process of bringing something new into the world. So if you are painting a still life of your Dyson, or maybe doing woodworking, or creating a new way to present data at work, that's creative. You're bringing something new into this world. And I kind of always thought that if you could do that, then maybe there's something unique about you that could come out into the world, and people could appreciate something that only you could create. And I couldn't hear people talk about these things that they wanted to create and stop doing. There's something important about it. These are people from the alpha cohort of Creative Weekend, and they're a great example of what I'm talking about. Like Dan took a year-long hiatus from drawing cartoons and wanted to get back to it. John wanted to make his own board game. Nina wanted, and she's in med school, so she's swamped, wanted to get back to audio storytelling. And then Luke greyhounded from Canada to work on his novel, and he didn't axe murder any of us. That's a win. So one of the things about sandboxes that I love is when you're a kid, you get put in a sandbox and you try, inherently, because you don't know what else you're doing. You pour water in the sand, you dig, that's what you do. You had to start. You had to do something. And that's what's so beautiful about this concept, this idea, is that even if you just try something, that's unique unto itself. It could be a bomb and it could totally fail, but at least you did it. And what a beautiful lesson that is. Usually when you're in the sandbox, you weren't alone. Somebody would come along and your parents would say to play nice. And it was kind of our first introduction into teamwork. And you would have these kids that would show up and they would kind of play pretend with you. They'd let you into this world. And then at the same time, they would be incredibly candid, almost to a fault. But it wasn't. When we got older, we got to this place where people stopped doing that. They stopped being a part of our trying, and they stopped giving us honest feedback to help us be better people. They closed it off. Kids are great role models of this. And why did we lose that along the way? And then, there was are there kids here? No. There's always that asshole kid that came down and would just like kick your stuff over. But you would cry or you'd leave, and then you would come back couple days and you try again, and that asshole kid does grow up, and you meet them at work, and kill them with kindness. It works. So it's that same lesson as when you get into life and people start being mean about your ideas. You have to start over. It's crazy to think that you can introduce an idea into the world and not be prepared to stumble, because it's going to happen. That's part of the process. But what a beautiful thing when you figure out that you can dust yourself off and keep going. One of the best parts about that Van Arnswald letter, he writes in it that he thinks sand heaps will lower vagabondage and youthful ruffianism. And I like to think maybe that Sandbox has made some of our finest ruffians, and I wouldn't be opposed if more people had some ruffianism in them. And I just have to say, like, the people that trusted me along the way with this were people who wanted to do something, and they wanted to just run away for a weekend and create and be who they are and be their unique selves. The next slide is just a listing of some of the people that were really supportive, and I'd be so wrong to not thank them for their honesty and their support along the way. So if you're here and you're in a cohort or you're supporting, can you just stand up or raise your hand if you're in the back, if you can see your tiny picture? So we got some folks over here, some folks in the back. We give them a round of applause. I really appreciate it. I do this because I care and I think it's important. I don't want people to lose what's so uniquely them and these wonderful things that make them who they are. And I just wish people brought that to the world a little bit more. So my name is Stephen Harowitz. I started Creative Weekend, and welcome to your Sandbox. Thanks.